welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. You're checking out, in my opinion, one of the best places to learn how to actually grow and scale your business. There's no fluff on this podcast, just good advice. And in fact, we're going to be talking about the good things that you can be doing to grow your business. Now, today's episode is a great one. We have Stacey Conkle, who is a local business owner who runs a beautiful day cleaning. She's a genius of a business owner. We're going to be talking about the entrepreneurial path with her today. But before we dive in, a couple of quick announcements. We are celebrating 5 years of good advice. You're going to be seeing on the podcast our top 10 most downloaded episodes over the last 5 years. Very excited to start airing those starting at the end of this week. And other than that, you're about to hear from one of the amazing businesses who sponsor the podcast. Of course, if you're subscribed to the Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice, you're actually going to be able to skip that ad and jump right into this conversation with Stacey. Otherwise, check out this quick ad. We'll be right back. Talk soon. You know that feeling at 10 o'clock at night when you finished a long day of work and you're trying to figure out all the financials of your business? Well, the good news is you don't have to be an expert in this space. You got to just know who is the expert to call. That person is Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions, and he does business bookkeeping services better than anyone else I know. By not only helping you manage your books, he can also be the expert to help you understand your books. On top of that, he also handles payroll for businesses and really takes the worry and stress of managing all of these things so that you can focus on running your business well. So what are you waiting for? Stop wasting time trying to understand all these elements of your business. Call Steve Lay at Equity Business Solutions and he'll show you the value beyond the numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. Stacey, it's so great to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
So you are a business owner. You joined the NWA community a few years ago.
Right.
Do you call yourself a native now, or
no? I don't call myself a native yet.
Okay.
Yeah, not yet.
I asked it as if
time.
I was going to accuse you of doing something wrong if you said yes, I am a native.
Not yet. So. Not yet. It's home, but native takes some time, right?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your business. What you do on a daily basis. I know you have a couple of things that you're doing, but you have the main thing and you have a side thing. Tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Yeah. So my business is cleaning. Both businesses are cleaning. But I started, right after we moved here, I started with short-term rentals after experiencing property management and wanted to build a company that catered to it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where it started. And then after a couple of years, that not evolved, but I added a second company separately, though, for residential cleaning people's homes that they live in. And that's a beautiful day cleaning.
Yeah. And then do you have a different name for?
Yes, that's cozy cabin cleaning.
Okay. I like how you have such I'm trying not to sound like condescending, oh, that's cute, but
right.
No, I'm just this is
right.
I was never really that gifted at this kind of stuff. Like someone asked me what should I call my business? And I was like, dude, I don't know.
It's tough to come up with names.
Yeah.
But,
And I like, the business. I saw a business that was, it was called Arkansas Fencing. And I was like, yeah, I love that.
Exactly.
I know exactly what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
So I feel like there is this nuance of not being too cute, I guess, but also oh yeah, I get an idea.
Well, and so when it comes to business names, so you can get really hung up on them. I'm one of those people that can get hung up on it. But then I have come to realize that really it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. People have some really weird names that when you first hear them, you're like, how did that even happen?
Right.
And how are they a franchise with that name?
Right.
But
well, I mean, think about it. What the heck is Google?
Yeah.
Or Amazon.
Yeah. So what matters is that people get to know you and it becomes normal.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody who has a kid with a weird name and you're like, why? But then it becomes normal. Right.
That's a whole other conversation because my wife and I, we had this phase where it was everyone we knew who was getting pregnant for the first time and they were doing the gender reveal or the whatever reveal. And then they would do the name. This is a thing, by the way, the name reveal,
of course.
which we never, I never did this. But this is a thing. I don't want to begrudge anyone from their first kid experience,
Yeah.
Though I was at a gender reveal party and I immediately asked, I was like, hey, are there any explosives that are going to go off? And they're like, well, we have, like a firework or two. And I was like, okay, I'm taking my kids inside till it's all over. So this whole thing's become like an industry at this point. But we were at like a name reveal party and they said the name and we were like, my wife and I were on opposite sides of the room and we immediately that look with your spouse where you're just like, huh, that's interesting.
Okay. Yep.
But we do this with our business names sometimes. And I think about, and it's not to knock any of us, I don't think, but I think what you said is really wise in that it ultimately doesn't matter. And as business owners, we can get hyper fixated on some things that feel really important, but aren't always that important.
Yeah, not as important as, we feel they are or we're making them out to be. Yeah, for sure. And so that's one of them, the name.
Yeah. So beautiful day. And then Cozy Cabin, was that it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Now, how do you split your time or do you split, or is it all kind of the same in your mind? Or
well, right now, because A Beautiful Day is in its first year, I mean, everything's going to that. Cozy Cabin is very much like I did a good job with systems. It's very, aside from hiring, which is a nonstop issue, it's on autopilot kind of, it's very part-time for me. So I just kind of, keep the plate spinning. And then, we go through hiring, highs and lows, but otherwise, almost all of my attention's on A Beautiful Day because I'm just trying to get that thing off the ground right now. And it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah. I've heard it described as, I can't think of the analogy with it, but it's like cranking a wheel and how it takes so much effort to get like that first full crank around. But then once you do, but it definitely feels that way. And I mean, I think everyone has a different story, but for me, that cranking effect was like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a lot.
The residential space is much more competitive, right? So, and there's just a lot going on there. So a lot of options. It's a lot more difficult than the short-term rental space was getting started. So even though I experienced that to some degree in the first go around with Cozy Cabin, it's much more difficult in the space with A Beautiful Day. So the 2 to 3 year thing is much more realistic for me as I'm finding out as we go. Than, it took only 2 years to get Cozy Cabin. It was profiting right away, but like profiting to where I could actually take home, a decent little small paycheck, and then to where it's operating on its own. It's going to be a very different story this time.
You said something that really was interesting to me, the creating the system so it kind of runs itself.
Yeah.
And it's always surprising to me, the business owners who are working like crazy hours and they, like when you mention system or you mention like process, they're like, yeah, I have an Excel spreadsheet. And it's like, okay, well, that's not quite a system.
Right.
But I'd love to hear more about kind of how you created this and got it running on its own.
Yeah. Yes. So a lot of it just has to do with, I was trying to automate as much as possible. And there's still so much more I can do. But really, with short-term rentals, the biggest thing is the schedule is really crazy because it's based on people's vacations. You got to think short-term rentals is basically synonymous with Airbnb. Okay. So the people book their vacations and this is what I don't like about the business, is that the schedule, it tells me, I mean, I could set it up differently, but the whole catering to it, is it tells me when we're booked, so, it's 7 days a week and holidays are a big thing, right? So the calendar is a very big piece of it. And so anytime someone books their vacation, it shows up on our calendar. That was like the main automated piece I had to get in place. And that's just a software that's out there. We use resortcleaning.com, right? Anyways, and because of that, now I have friends that are in the business. They do all sorts of different, parts of the industry of cleaning, but most people don't use that. And they're missing appointments or, they're trying to remember or plug them into their calendar when they get to it later. And it's just absolute chaos. We've never missed an appointment, which is a big thing with these. And so that's a big part of it was the automation of the calendar. So it just feeds right into our calendar. Our calendar. So we'll get a notification and then we can schedule things as they come in, or half of them are already booked out, next month, we'll say. Right. But otherwise, it's just the only other piece that isn't systemized is hiring. You still got to have a hand in that, and that's constant.
Well, I think for our listeners, hearing what you just described, I mean, it gets booked, it goes on the calendar 7 days a week. I mean, that sounds really great. And yet a lot of people are hesitant to rely on technology, utilize different services to kind of automate different parts of their business. Any ideas why people are so slow to use those things?
Yeah, sometimes I ask myself the same question, but I think there's not knowing, right? Some people are just, there's things that we're more inclined, like that come easier to understanding and using. And I think that for some people, systems just isn't natural, right? And it's not something that they desire. Or the bigger thing that I've noticed, at least in my field, is that a lot of the owners are the operators, and I was there too, but you can't have that mindset. You have to be, even if you are operating, you have to be thinking about not operating at some point and setting yourself up so that you're not operating. But people are drowning in the field, so
but at least I'll
get to it. Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'll get to it later, or I know I need to do this, but I just worked 10, 12 hours today and I'm not going to. And then the next day comes and the next day comes. So I would imagine, at least in my field, that systems, or most businesses, when you're owner operator, you're drowning. And so you just don't get to it. Right.
It's the best life,
Yeah. Yeah. It's great.
It does feel like sometimes people are so, a lot of people's stories, and I don't know your story, but a lot of people's stories for getting into entrepreneurship is one part stick it to the corporate man. Yeah. Like I had a bad experience. I had a boss. I had this job that was soul sucking, and now I'm going to, venture out on my own. I think one part, not necessarily that, but just wanting to do something that they have their own control and agency over. And what I've noticed is that sometimes people, they so dislike the idea of like the corporate structured world that when you start talking about systems and processes, it's like, whoa, that's, I left that life behind.
That's a good point.
Without realizing that, I mean, yes, this may have been a soul sucking job, but they had systems of accountability and
well, and let's be real, because what's happening is you're about to build the soul sucking job for somebody else, but you want to be in the driver's seat, right? That's what I'm thinking. So, but I agree with that, like that. So I think that for me, I wasn't like, I didn't love corporate, but I've worked corporate and small business for other people. And I enjoyed bits of both. But for me, it was more the being in control or doing, I enjoy being in the driver's seat and putting my own ideas to test, So for me, it was that. I enjoyed some things about corporate and everything else. But the bottom line is, if you're going to do anything scalable, you have to have some, I mean, if you're going to stay small and maybe boutique-ish and, you're going to be involved all the time, but if you're headed, you can do that. You don't necessarily have to have systems and operations at the forefront all the time. But if you're going to build anything scalable, if you plan to ever step away from the business in the future, you have to be creating some sort of systems and processes so that people know what to do and plug in. Otherwise, it's chaos, whether you're there or not, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what you're going to deal with all the time. And this is why people get out of being an entrepreneur and get out of business, because it's too much chaos.
Right. Well, and then the other piece of that then is having people you can delegate to, rely on. I think it's interesting too for us business owners is a lot of times we think that those absences from our businesses will always be planned. Like when we talk about like delegating or having a process where the business kind of runs itself, we often think like, oh yeah, for my 10-year anniversary, I'm going to take 2 weeks off and I really hope the business keeps running.
Right.
Well, it may not be that. It may be, a loved one gets into a car accident, it pulls you away, or, obviously we don't want that for anybody.
But that's,
But it's interesting how we often don't think about those things that happen that we're not in control of. And so then the question becomes, here's how I think of it, is like with COVID, I think about the businesses that did really well were investing in their management of their people on the front end. And then when COVID hit, it was, we have a lot of trust we can lean on, versus the businesses that were like, I mean, I was getting phone calls that was like, hey, how do we build culture here? How do we build trust? And it was like, dude, you're like 6 months too late, man. I mean,
Yeah, and that's another, when it comes to the people, which your internal people, your staff are the other side of the coin. You got your customers and your staff. They're equally important.
I'm just going to pause you. I don't mean to interrupt you. Yeah. I love that you looped those two things together.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a brilliant point, and that people, a lot of businesses have those two groups so far away of like the customers, but then like the people, it's like Oh yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Oh God.
So I
no.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that you're pairing these things together. Oh, sorry about
Is
that.
that good? Or if it works, it works. Okay.
Sorry, her mic was
well, they
drooping
are
on
right.
us.
Yeah, it's just sliding down.
Go ahead.
But
I interrupted you.
They
I'm
are,
sorry.
yeah. So the people piece, so with the systems and the operation, and really thinking about it like that. So not just for yourself, right, but for the fact that people, right, because your staff, you need stability there. You need them to be happy. This culture thing, all of it ties together. It's all a big piece, but in order, this is my belief, is that most people want to be good at their job. They want to be happy when they go to work, right? But a lot of it just falls apart because, be it that there's no systems or you've got bad management or whatever version of it is. But when you have systems in place and people know what's expected of them, right? And then they can perform it, or they know how to perform or what performing really even means in that environment, then you have a higher chance of overall happiness, which then creates stability internally, which then pours out in everywhere else, right? So it's just, in my mind, you can't really build anything beyond yourself that will take care of you, and you need your business to take care of you. That's kind of the point, right? And your people too. But you can't do that without having some sort of, it's like systems in place. But to me, it's very much like how we are with parenting. Your kids need some structure. They need some freedom as well. We talked about that a little earlier, kind of too, right? Structure, but freedom, and there's this balance. And anyways, but
yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I love also, you're saying a lot of things that I'm like, oh man, I really want to go on that for a second. But we talk about leadership a lot on the podcast, and I have a before I was doing Good Advice, I was doing this leadership consulting company. And one of the things that would often come up, and you mentioned it, I believe that people want to do good in their job. Right. And there's managers out there. And frankly, if for some of you guys who are listening, if this is your, and you can just keep pulling that up if it keeps, I don't know why it's drooping on you. Yeah, for those of you guys who are listening, if your tendency is, my employees are always trying to take advantage of me, I think you're going to have a little bit of a difficult time.
Right.
But this perception of they want to do a good job. So how do I, and I think sometimes we have a hard time of seeing these things aren't mutually exclusive, in that you can both know your people want to do a good job, but also give them I think of like the, at the bowling alley, the
bumpers.
Yes, because I need those.
Yes.
We don't do date nights bowling anymore, by the way, because I would get too mad.
Hate bowling.
My wife was like, "This isn't fun for me. Like, you're such a baby." But so anyway, I think employees and understand something too. The distinction here, guys. We're not talking about your employees are incompetent, so you need to give them bumpers. I think it's, when you empower your people, they simply need to know where the lanes are.
Right.
It's like, I worked for a business where someone was picking up, their job was to pick up groceries from a name brand store. Right. And she's 65 years old, and she was picking up like 2,000 pounds of food, and they were having her load the truck by herself. Jeez. And there's no scenario in the world where this is good for this person. Right. And she's doing it in the middle of the summer heat. It's like, this is ridiculous. So I was so upset by this. I went to this store and basically chewed out the GM of this place, being like, what are you doing to this poor person? Well, after the fact, it was like, hey, that really wasn't your job to do that. Yeah. So I have freedom in my position, but I didn't understand where the boundary was between, hey, really someone else who has more, this is a long-term relationship, who has more trust built, who can move the needle better for this person, would have been more useful. And knowing those boundaries would have served me well. Again, it's not that I'm incompetent. It's not that I'm not able to have the conversation. So I think for our employees, knowing what's expected, and Stacey and I just came from a meeting where someone was asking this exact question, business owners who don't know how to hold their people accountable. And I think it all starts with this question of, do I know what's expected of me? Right. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Right. They don't. And there's this other factor too. Yep. So what's expected of me, or how much can I get away with? Right. And that's something that we deal with all the time. Like, good people, just, you go in, here's how we do it. So I'll use ours as a
loose example, but we go through our training process. This is what is expected of you. It's also in photos and written. It's everywhere. I do this so that I don't, because I always usually come back to myself and like, oh, where did I miss this? What could I have done differently? Anyways, we have layers and layers of what's expected and ways to reference that. But people by nature will still, they're having a rushed day. They want to get in, get out, whatever the version of it is for them. They cut corners, right? And now it's your job, my job as the leader, to do it. What am I letting slide? Like how tight am I going to run this ship? Am I going to run it so tight that I run people off? Or am I going to run it, just tight enough so that anyways. So what you allow to slide is another factor too. So people may even know what's expected, but how you follow up and the accountability factor and how consistent you are with all of that is another part of it. So this whole back end stuff, leadership is not easy. It's not like it's hard to do. It's challenging to be consistent is usually all it comes down to with everything is consistency.
Well, and people are naturally complicated. And I think we all have different personalities on our teams.
Yes.
And just being very honest, some of those personalities are very difficult to work with and more importantly to manage.
Yes.
There are people who are incredibly qualified who are very hard to manage.
Yeah.
And then there are people who are very easy to manage who aren't delivering the value that you'd want in that position.
Right.
And I think this kind of all goes back to why systems and processes are so important is because for you guys who are listening and maybe you're firing, maybe you're firing somebody, but you're hiring maybe your first employee or maybe your first 2 or 3 employees. You have to understand that you are very quickly going to transition from running and managing your business to now feeling like you're managing people more.
Absolutely.
And it almost, in my mind, kind of feels like a scale where it's like the more I lean into managing people, the less money I make because I can't divert the attention I need to the business.
Absolutely.
So having those systems where the business can sort of operate and run itself, and then you can invest in your people.
Right.
And this is, but then again, I'm oversimplifying it, obviously.
But that's a good oversimplification. Yeah, that makes sense. It's the balance.
What's your hiring process like? I mean, I think hiring is a pain that I think really everyone, despite whatever, regardless of the industry, I think everyone has gone through this pain point in some way. I haven't mentioned on the podcast, but when I hired a social media person, I mentioned it this morning, 200 applications, I think maybe like 15 interviews, finally hired someone who was a great person, not a great employee.
Right.
Didn't end up keeping them long term.
Right.
But hiring can be very painful.
Yes,
and it costs a lot of time and money.
Yep.
Solve it for us. What's the answer?
I can't solve it for you. I need somebody to solve it for me. So that is not my strong suit. I would very much like to. I've never tried a hiring service. I would like to be doing that, but we're still all part-time and it's inconsistent and weird. So we're not quite there yet. But my process is, I think, like most people's, which is posting on the standard sites, and then contacting, like I'll call and I'll have an initial conversation. So I can weed out some people, but I have come to the realization that I cannot trust my gut on hiring. So a lot of it right now, we're to the point where it's like, okay, there's some obvious red flags that we know about from our experience so far, but it goes through me. Then I have my trainer so that we at least have 2 people's opinions. And then we put them in the field for training, and then that sometimes weeds them out. And it's time consuming and expensive, and I hate it, but I don't have answers for that because it's not my strong suit.
All right, guys.
It's painful.
There you go.
Yeah. Somebody help me.
No, I think for you guys listening, if you're experiencing the pain point of hiring, I mean, just join the club.
Yeah,
I honestly, we were just talking earlier this morning, about a business that's closing down and how much of a tough time they had in hiring people and keeping people. And, this is the world we live in right now. And that it's I don't know what you'd call it. The person interviewing, it's their world right now, like a kind of a buyer's seller's market. I mean, the leverage and the power is in the person applying rather than the business.
So I'll say, Cozy Cabin, the first company, very part-time, the schedule's kind of crazy for the staff too, right? So it's not an ideal internal situation. And then where I'm trying and working on building Cozy Cabin, the A Beautiful Day, the residential side, is because of these problems. I'm trying to build this. I am building this very differently, right? But it's going to take time. And that includes all the stuff we were talking about before about culture, but it's, better pay, something that serves them in such a way that you can start, like, eventually the tide will turn. It doesn't, like, if you build it right, the tide will turn, where even in a market where, like, employees have all the options in the world, you're trying to build something where they want to work for you. You have people coming to you eventually, right? So I really hope that I can get this to the point where in 5 years, people are coming to me. There's something here that most of the other companies don't offer, but it's really hard to build on that because a lot of it's money.
Yeah.
So you've got to be kind of top dollar, and then you've got to build this culture. And anyway, a lot of detail goes into it. And
well, no, I mean, I think any business owner who is in the long game understands that this stuff doesn't get built overnight.
Right.
There's a local company called Harvest Group that back when I would do like onboarding for businesses, they would get a lot of people from Walmart and JB Hunt, like all these other big stores.
Yes.
And the number one thing that I would hear from these people who were recently hired by Harvest Group was because I'd ask, like, well, why Harvest Group? And they would talk about the reputation that Harvest Group has. In fact, on the podcast, we had an interview with Steve Blair, who was the head of HR, COO at Harvest Group. And he talked so many stories about what they did to value their people. But I think the disconnect here is that most businesses, well, here's a quick story. I had a business call me and they said, hey, we're doing our end of year employee party, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's 200 people or 250 employees. My budget's $200. What can I do? Okay. And I was like, well, you can't even do a pizza party at that price point. Yeah. I was like, what do you expect to do? Yeah. But a lot of people, they expect the one-time thing solves the problem.
Right.
And you even mentioned pay. It feels like a lot of businesses. I had a business a few years ago who was having a really tough time retaining employees. And he said, my main issue right now is I'm paying $10 an hour and my employees are quitting to go work at Whole Foods because Whole Foods is paying $15 an hour. Mm-hmm. He said, now what can I do to keep them? And I was like, okay. And he said, before you answer, I need you to the answer can't be that I need to pay them more.
Oh, okay.
Because $10 is what I'm set on. And I was like, there's I'm not brilliant enough to solve this, but in my mind,
I mean, we can't ignore that factor.
There's no answer here.
Yeah.
Like, you're looking for these little micro decisions you can make that might make the difference for an employee.
All of that matters.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
But the pay, pay is not everything. We all know that, but it is a significant part of it.
And I think that's where people get dishonest with themselves I think it's fair to say it's not the main thing for everybody, but it is the main thing for many people and an important thing for a lot of people. And it's intellectually dishonest, I think, as business owners for us to, like you even said it earlier about the soul sucking thing for, like, we're making that for other people. Right. Like this whole, you're going to come work for me. And, a lot of people they just don't grab onto that.
No, because you think you're different, I guess. But, and you try to be, but it takes a lot of effort. But yeah, that pay thing, it's not everything. Money was not everything for me all the way along my career. But the bottom line is, especially when you start getting into your family life, and you get older and you gas prices are freaking out. Like right now, the economy is not stable. Like everything's skyrocketed and the wages haven't caught up. And we're in this crossfire right now, and that's just people. It's almost maybe the only thing that matters for a lot of people right now. They're willing to do some different jobs for the right kind of pay because the stress that you feel at home internally, just on your shoulders when it comes to money, especially when you're not making it financially, is enough to maybe shed a lot of the other things. And culture matters. Being treated well matters, but pay is still just the heavy portion of it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we make this way too sexy a conversation. I think of, and I see this on social media a lot of like, and I've even like shared this kind of content, especially when I worked at my previous consulting place. Of people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses, and people, they quit they quit this great paying job to take less money elsewhere. And this gets shared so many times. And I'm kind of sick of it, honestly, because I'm like, okay, yes, but
sometimes,
you know, I'm like, I also know people who they stayed at their job because it paid $20K more and they had 5 kids and that mattered to them.
And it's become very common now to job hop, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but job hop to get more money. Like that's just at least the consensus is that that's how you get more money, right? As you leave and move on.
Well, and that's an employer's fault. It is. You offer 1% at the end of a year, right? And I can go.
But your new employee comes in making more. That stuff's insane.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and maybe this is a greater insight on, you know, just being a long-term thinker. I do know a lot of business owners are really short-term minded, and many employers will let that employee go to take 10K elsewhere, and then they'll bring in the new employee at the same rate as before, right? But no experience. You know, they take 6 months to a year. No
loyalty yet.
Exactly. Yeah. And you end up spending, you know, infinitely more than you would have spent.
Right. I mean, for more instability.
Exactly. Exactly.
Great. Yeah, I know.
But sometimes I just feel like I'm rambling, and then I'm like, yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, not really though. It's a thing. And right now I'm trying to remember something you said because I wanted to run off on it, but I don't remember what it was.
No, I mean, it's wild. I mean, I think for everybody listening, I mean, you know, it's interesting because I feel like sometimes people make business ownership sound so simple, you know, and so easy. And I see this a lot. And I think for me, the situation I get into is new business owners who call me who are really excited and jazzed about their idea. And I have like swimming in my head all of these complexities that come with running a business.
Yes.
And when I start to share, it's usually in the form of a question. It's like, well, how are you going to address this? What are you going to do with that?
Right.
I was talking to a guy who he was talking about a service he was selling, and I was like, well, have you thought about what it's going to cost you to sell that? And he was like, well, I think I would just find someone who would, you know, sell me the materials for cheap. And I was like, well, do you know someone? And he's like, well, no. I was like, do you know the industry?
So you're overanalyzing for him, you know?
Yeah. I'm like, do you know the industry? He's like, no. And I'm like, so you think you're just going to find someone who will sell you lumber at a discount?
Right.
Because, and he's like, well, what I'm doing is really special.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly,
special.
right?
Yes.
And so, but what I have found is as I start to ask these questions, I get a little sensitive is not the right word. I get, I guess I'm kind of careful asking these questions because I can see the excitement levels like dipping as they're like, oh, wow. Like
the old veterans coming in here like, we're a kid.
Well, what I read, you know, these people are like, well, what I read on social media is I could quit my job and be running a 6-figure business. And I mean, this was me. I mean, my previous firm, I think I sold like $250,000 in sales. And I thought, well, geez, if I did a little bit of this, I mean, I could be a millionaire in 5 years. And, you know, then I realized I knew nothing about sales or running a business or anything.
Right. Yeah. But to the example that you gave, though, there is something to just diving in ignorantly, you know, because when you do think about it too much, you realize that your chances are very slim and you may never do it, you know? So there's 2 ways to go about that. I wanted to go back to I remembered what that thing was, long-term, short-term thinking, right? Because this is something that I struggle with all the time. Because you know how you hear from other people, maybe even like people in your industry or people who are doing similar things as you or not. But, you know, and I am very much a long-term thinker, and I sometimes worry that, you know, I'm not short-term thinking enough, you know? So everything for me is like building it for the long term, but you have to have some short-term thinking as well, because you have to fill it in, you know, you have to have some revenue coming in sooner than later. And a lot of the long-term thinking just takes too long, you know, when you run it like that. But anyway, what about you? Like, are you with long-term?
I'm a big picture person. It's really hard for me. I've had to create systems that help me in the short term. Like, what am I doing today? Who am I talking to today?
Yeah.
Because I'm very much, like I see the ship as a whole. I see where we're going. I'm like, this is so exciting. You know, for example, like I've sold a bunch of advertising on the podcast. Well, then where I'm going next isn't the next person to talk to sell advertising to, which my business would probably really appreciate that. Instead, it's like, oh, where could the podcast be? What if I took all of the money I made from that and just set it aside and then put that into my own advertising for the podcast to get more listeners?
Right.
Like, what would that do for the show as like a brand? So I think a lot about stuff like that, and it's really hard for me. It's really common. I'll think about something that will make me money 3 months from now.
Right.
And I don't always think, okay, but how am I getting paid today?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that operational piece, I think it feels less sexy is why I feel less drawn to it, but it is very important because most businesses fail because they run out of cash.
Right. Yeah.
So,
but I think that thinking long term all the time is how you run out of cash now. Like that's my problem. I'll keep putting it back in. And it's like, okay, well, you need to make money. No, I will. Well, when?
Yeah, and I it's interesting because I mentioned earlier I was talking to this guy on the phone yesterday who he was thinking about like this new thing he wanted to do and like how does he present it to his wife, and I was like, man, I honestly don't know because there needs to be a short-term assurance piece to it. I can make money right now with it, but then there also needs, in terms of like stability, okay, 3 years from now, where are we heading to?
Right.
And at the end of the day, I don't know if it's like you spend 50 on this and 50 on this, like 50%. Where I end up is like, okay, yeah, this just all reminds me that running a business is really freaking hard.
Right.
Like it's really freaking hard. And I think you guys listening, if you feel like it's freaking hard, it's supposed to be.
Right. You might be doing it right.
If you feel like it's easy, I resent you. No, I'm just kidding. I did have a guy who started a business and he was quitting his job to start his business. And I was like, well, just so you know, man, it's going to take a while to make your first sale. And he signed like a major deal like on day 4.
And you're like, okay.
And I was like, all right, man, well, congrats, I guess. It was just always easy for him.
Yeah.
And there's this really great movie, a chick flick. I can't think of what it's called.
Oh, I got to know.
I think it's called He's Just Not That Into You.
Oh, yeah, yes. Yeah,
where it's like, it's the exception, not the rule.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and for you guys listening, it's a really good movie, actually. But they talk about, girl goes on a date, the guy doesn't call her. Well, the answer as to why he didn't call was he's just not that into you.
Right.
But what the friends and what they talk about is like, well, maybe he lost his phone, maybe his SIM card got, and it's like all these different things instead of just facing the truth. And I think, for those of us who are running businesses, it is just really freaking hard. And when you hear stories like my friend who his business took off immediately, that's the exception, not the rule.
Yes.
And the other thing, I think, piece of this too is you have to be passionate enough, not necessarily about the job you're doing, because I do think sometimes people get into a job, I don't know if you love cleaning or not, but that's just the avenue of where they want to go. But there has to be some passion there that you're willing to punish yourself for, years on end.
Yes.
And that's right, guys, years, not like weeks.
Right.
Anyway, I've said a lot.
Punish yourself. That's funny because that's what it is, but I was talking about this a few weeks back about I don't know what it is about that punishing yourself. I'll never forget that now because, I called it a challenge. Do I love the challenge or something? Which of course, we must, but there is something about, like the fight, like, I don't know. Like it drives me crazy. It's brought me to tears, like stresses me the hell out sometimes. But that I don't know, like I want to like come out on top, like I want to fight my way out on top, Anyway, there's a lot of things. So I enjoy that part.
Is that what drives you? Is it the challenge of entrepreneurship or?
Well, so listen, what's driving me is that this thing needs to work because I want it to fund my retirement so I can live the life that I want,
Right.
So I've got some time, but I'm scared all the time that it's not going to pan out, but I do enjoy the ride, I guess, is where we're at then. The ride is a freaking fight. It's like Fight Club out here, Yeah. So I don't know.
I've still never seen it, so no spoilers, please.
Well, it's crazy. It's a good movie.
I said that to someone. They were like, it's been 20 years, man.
Yeah,
like, you can't drop the no spoilers line anymore.
Yeah.
It's way past the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is kind of like an adrenaline junkie side of entrepreneurship of like, will I make enough money? Or even if you're making your bills, like, okay, I feel like I'm on the cusp of something.
Going somewhere?
Yeah.
Right. The cusp. Yeah, you do. You often feel like you're on the cusp. Yeah. And then I saw some meme or something, everybody put something out there that gives you a little breath of fresh air and a laugh together, but it was something about that. Like basically like it's hell for, 3 months and then you get a little dab of, something and you're like, okay, I can keep going, and then you're just hell and then you're like, whatever it is, but it's just enough.
But this is my point though. When someone calls me and they're like, and I'm probably making it sound like people call me all the time. They don't.
Yeah.
But like when I occasionally get a phone call
Yeah.
and someone's like really excited and jazzed, I feel like I'm like this PTSD like war veteran who's
Yeah.
like, you there's old World War II photos where the people are coming back from war
Yeah,
and they're
with
just
the
like haggard and I don't know if you ever saw Band of Brothers, but there's
Yeah,
a scene where these guys are going off to combat, and as they're going off, the soldiers are returning, like passing them. And I mean, that is entrepreneurship, I feel like. And it honestly kind of gets on my nerves when maybe I'm just not a very good business person. Like maybe this isn't the norm, and most people are having really.
That's what we tell ourselves until we all start talking, which is nice about networking and getting in your group, because you do realize that, no, this is exactly how it is for the vast majority of people.
Well, I was talking to a guy and I was like, man, the grind of entrepreneurship. And he was like, it's not a grind for me. And I was like,
please.
Yeah, I was like, okay, man, that's thanks, I guess.
Or was it you? Somebody recently brought up about how, I thought it was you, right? About a friend was like, oh, it was no big deal. And it was like, do you remember what you went through? And I think people forget how hard it was at some point. So maybe somebody has gotten to, the comfortable plateau of things, right? And they've just forgotten how hard it was,
Yeah, we're very short term.
Yes.
I think there was a guy, and maybe this is the story you're thinking of. There was a guy who talked a lot about his business and how amazing it was. His business was doing really well, and how it was just so easy.
Yes.
Well, I'd known him for a long time, and I was like, dude, first of all, this is year 11 of your business. Like, let's get that out of the way. I love that it's working, but it's year 11.
Right.
And dude, I freaking remember the Facebook posts of you.
Yes, that's the one.
Being very emotional and me being like, this is a little weird. I don't know if I put this on Facebook.
Right.
And I'm like, but we don't always, I'm not saying he was like purposely hiding that. I just thought it's interesting that you forgot.
Yes.
How
rough it is. Yeah. Because I think like I haven't forgotten, but the sting is gone from it's back because I'm doing this thing over again and it's worse, But like, I think like, man, why did I start this over again when I could have just kept going? But, it's because I wanted something different in the long run, scalability factor, whatever, right? But and I related when you brought that up that first time about like childbirth, that's really rough. And, some women are like, I can never do that again, but you do, you forget very quickly, even how rough it is.
I'll never do this again.
Yeah.
And then you.
Same with like a puppy, I'll never do this again. You get another one. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah. So, for somebody listening, business owner, what kind of advice would you leave them with?
Someone already at it.
Yeah, let's do. I think most people who listen are probably I mean, I know people who tell me like, hey, I listen to the podcast. They're actual business owners. Some people listen who I think, shout out to you guys who you're working your 9 to 5.
Yeah,
I think people are drawn to entrepreneurship. There is something really freeing about it. Like
freeing.
I love
the hope,
that. Yeah, and I love that I can, if I needed to, I could not do any work for a day and just spend the day with my kids.
Yeah,
I love that I have the freedom to do that.
Such a big deal. Yeah. So I don't know anything really. Just it's my experience, whatever. But what I would say, my advice is to find get out there, get out from behind the computer, and get out with your fellow entrepreneurs. Networking, not just for building your business, but networking has become like, I never thought I would want to network, and I love the hell out of it because sure, people get to know you, but I need to get out from behind my computer and talk to people and find out that I'm not alone, that I'm not dumb, that I'm not like doing everything wrong. Like, that there's a lot of things that all the bad things are normal, and you find some comfort in that, and that gives you the fuel to keep going.
Right.
And you need as much fuel to keep going as you can. So that would be my main piece of advice today. Would just get out there and connect with your fellow entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. I remember a business owner who was just starting out, who he was asking for advice on how to kickstart the sales pipeline that he had. And he's like, but here's the caveat. I feel like people put me in really unfair positions where they ask for advice, and I'm like, I'm not smart enough to answer this question. Yeah. But he was like, here's the deal. I don't want to leave my house. I don't want to go to any networking meetings. I don't have to meet anyone. And also, I don't want anyone to have to call me. Like, I just want them to be able to go to my website and buy from me. And I was like, yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know, man. You're gonna have to think of something here. I don't have the answer. No, I think it's great advice. I think many of us are very disconnected as business owners and entrepreneurs, and finding those opportunities to swap stories can give you that boost of fuel that you need. And then also, it's weird to me how people down referral networks. Like
Yeah.
I get it long term of like, if you're going to scale, you can only be in so many places at once.
Right.
So like you can't fully rely on referrals, but some of my referrals have been my all-time best customers and have led to more business.
Do people down that?
Oh yeah. There's a whole, I don't know the phrasing, like trend, I guess, online of that being like a sign of like a problem with your business. If you're doing referral business, then your business doesn't have enough inherent value for people to come find you.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Like a healthy business will be one that people naturally go to, they're attracted to.
Right.
And what I would argue is that,
people have to know about you first.
Yeah, exactly. And here's an interesting thing. There was this TikTok trend, meme, whatever, 2 months ago on people were doing this dance on TikTok to some song.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the song came from this tiny hipster indie artist no one had ever heard of.
Right.
Well, their music blew up to millions of downloads, all this stuff. And the takeaway from this whole phenomenon was, here's this incredible artist that no one knew about,
right.
but because it went viral, now everyone realizes, the beauty and incredibleness of this artist, which the takeaway here, guys, isn't to try to get viral. I mean, if you can, I guess go for it.
Yeah.
The point is that there are 50,000 million, whatever, incredible businesses and business ideas out there, but because you're a drop in an ocean, people are not going to just naturally find you.
Yeah, I don't know who says that, but that's absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
So everybody, I as far as I know, most people know that referrals are your strongest, word of mouth. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you know how that you've always heard growing up, like, okay, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? Well, I've heard that it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Really, to me, that makes absolute sense. Because you can know a lot of people, but if they're not thinking about you, if they don't know who you are, your business, what is that going to do for you? Anyway, but that's what networking, does. It gets you out there. People know you, they're buying you, or they're attracted to you as a person, right?
Yeah,
you're the door in.
Yeah. And for our local people, you can go to nwanetworking.com. It has a calendar on it with all the networking events here in Northwest Arkansas. Stacey, it's been so great having you on the podcast today.
Yeah, I love talking with you. This is great.
For people listening who they want to know more about you, maybe they want to check out more about A Beautiful Day Cleaning, maybe they want to buy from you, what's the next step for them? Yeah,
so you can visit our website, abeautifuldaycleaning.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Stacey Conkle, Conkle. But we're on Facebook, Instagram, social. Really, if you Google A Beautiful Day Cleaning in Arkansas, you'll find us.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, for our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, what the heck are you waiting on? Click that subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. Also, don't forget that you can support the podcast through our Patreon. It's at patreon.com/goodadvice. For as little as the price of a cup of coffee, you can keep this good advice going. And also, don't forget, if you want to advertise on the podcast, you can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com to find out more. All that to say, thank you so much for those of you who do support the podcast. And for those of you listening, I wish you a good day. That is today's good advice. I'll catch you later. See ya.